I used to be a plain, ordinary film critic, but somehow weird stuff started happening around me. I found a childhood toy who rules an underground kingdom from out of my basement. I got a weird AI friend living in my TV. I fought a giant straight out of a kid's storybook and met a magical winter elf. But right now, I'm being forced to complete a checklist of TV and movie genres so I can save all of existence with the power of snarky film commentary.
No, I am not using the transporter again.
Come on. I worked all the bugs out of this time. I promise.
Really?
Yeah, everything will be fine. Okay, I did have one minor hiccup yesterday.
Minor hiccup? You wound up at McDonald's. Ronald had a goatee. The Grimace tried to kill you.
But at least they had the double fillet of fish.
I suggest you do one more test run.
Fine, just to show you how safe it is, I'll send you these chocolate bars and this jar of peanut butter.
Energized.
It, it, Goldbloomed.
The proper term is two-vicked. But okay, yeah, I'll tweak it again. But it'll have to wait until,
It's time for more Star Trek.
yeah, after the review. Our story begins with the Enterprise encountering a hypergiant star. Archer says no human has been this close to one of these. Reed says, too bad it won't go hypernova for another century. None of us will be around to see it go boom. T'Pol says, ahem. Archer says, can we go get a closer look? Please, 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 please. T'Pol says, for the 100th time, no. Reed says, but those other guys are doing it. Archer says, yeah, those other guys are. Wait, what other guys? Reed says, the guys in the other ship. Archer says, Hoshi, hail them. She says, it's a little staticky, but I'll try. The Vissian captain says, hey guys, Drennick's the name. I find a hypergiant and meet a new species? How cool is that? Captain, Archer, that's your name, right? Did you see the nuclear synthesis rate on that star? Amazing. Archer says, we don't know how to do that. Trennick says, look, I simply love foreign food. You get us some of this pizza I've been hearing so much about, and we'll show you how to do it. Over dinner, Drennick is bragging about this material that they can easily synthesize that allows their shuttle to dip into the outer regions of stars. Archer says, we don't have that either. Drennick says, ooh, rough. But look, you look like the type of guy who hasn't taken shore leave in a while. You can come with me. Meanwhile, Trip is trying to show two Vissian women the proper way to eat a sundae. Reed comes up to him and says, hey, shouldn't you be talking to their engineers? You remember what happened last time you hooked up with an alien woman? Trip says, I thought we agreed never to speak of that again. Trip goes over to see the engineers. They're an obvious throuple, but one of them is So quiet they make Silent Bob seem talkative. Trip tries to get them to open up. The wife says, "Why bother? It's only a cogenitor." After a really awkward pause, the couple say, "We'd love to see your engine room, and we're willing to return the favor. But you would need to get an inoculation for Omicron radiation." So it's off to see Dr. Flox. Trip asks, "What do you know about cogenitors?" Flox says, "What is it with humans? Why do you assume that every species would only have two sexes? One of the planets in the Rigel system has five, and Dorians reproduce in pods of four." Trip asks, "How would that even work?" Flock says, "You are so lucky that I have a serious porn addiction, even by Denobulan standards. But I gotta say, for a non-bimodal species, Vissians are kind of tame. All a cogenitor does is produce an enzyme that makes fertilization possible. Otherwise, Vissian and human sexual habits are virtually identical. So if you go over there and get invited to an orgy, keep an open mind." Trip says, "But I wasn't interested in..." Flock says, "Suit yourself." Archer and Drennick are in the stellar cartography lab adjusting the sensors. Drennick starts quoting Shakespeare. Archer asks, "How do you know that line?" Drennick says, "Oh, I had Ensign Sato send over a bunch of your books, and I gave her a bunch of ours. I hope you don't mind." Archer says, "Not at all. I'm just surprised you had time to read it." Drennick says, "Oh, for plot reasons, my people are very fast learners, especially when it comes to lingual skills." Archer says, okay. "Ooh, look, I can see ionized hydrogen. Most of my friends back home would be impressed." Drennick says, "And my people would be impressed with Macbeth. And they're gonna find this Nicholas Sparks guy hilarious." Meanwhile, on the Vissian ship, Trip isn't as interested in the secret of their faster warp drive than he thought he'd be. Perhaps because he just started a gender studies course at the Y, he spends most of his time asking about cogenitors. I mean, he won't shut up about them. Finally, the guy breaks down and says, "Fine, fine, what do you want to know?" Trip asks, "Does every family have one? Does that mean you have to share it with your brother? Because that would get..." The guy interrupts him. No, that would be inefficient. Cogenitors make up 3% of our population. Once my wife and I get pregnant, we're going to drop the cogenitor off at the nearest starbase, and they'll go on to their next family." Trip asks, "And the cogenitor has no say in this? What do they even do when they aren't helping you and your wife conceive? Do they have another job? Are they getting an education?" The guy says, "Why would they need any of that? They already have an important job as a living sex toy." Archer tells to Paul that he and Drennick are going on a little trip and he'll be back in a few days. To continue the cultural exchange, he wants some movies sent over to their ship. Paul goes to talk to Trip about this because he's unofficially in charge of the movie library. He says, "Do you think we should be talking to them? I mean, have you seen the way they treat that cogenitor?" Paul says, "Yes, but I don't believe in judging other cultures." Trip says, "Whether or not something is eaten with your hands or with silverware, that is up for debate. Whether or not a sentient being should be treated like a person, no, that is not something you can argue about. They have a cogenitor on board, and they treat her like..." Paul says, "Whoa, misgender much?" Trip says, ugh, their sexual biology is not the issue. Not when Cogenitor serves as both a gender and a name. Even Porthos has a name. If casting didn't want me misgendering the Cogenitor, they would have gotten Tilda Swinton for the role, not Becky Wallstrom. DePaul says, hey, so far this first contact is going great. We haven't been held hostage, you haven't been impregnated, and Mr. Daniels hasn't shown up. So please, while Captain Archer is away, don't fuck this up. So he goes to see Flax for a second opinion. The good old Doc says, she's right, you know. You don't know anything about Vissian culture, but one of the few universals I've found is that most people don't like talking about their mating habits in public. Trip says, what goes on in the bedroom is not the issue. I'm worried about how they treat the Cogenitor. Flock says, potato, potato. Trip says, you scan these people, right? Flock says, I scanned them for diseases. Not a single microbe that would be harmful to humans, denobulans, Vulcans, or canines. Trip says, I meant more, brain stuff. Cogenitors aren't like my cousin from Alabama, right? Flock says, I wouldn't know. And it's not like I'd leave the porta tracker from my medical tricorder lying out so you could take it or anything. Wink, wink. Remember those women Trip was talking to earlier? Good, because no one else did, apart from Reed. And it turned out he had some ulterior motives because now he's making his move. Alsatian Munster makes her horny. She turns the phrase, how about we tore each other's armories, into a euphemism. Much like Shockwave Part 2, this sort of feels like a porn parody of Star Trek. Archer tells Drennick how his father invented the Warp 5 engine. Drennick says, amazing! The guys who built our version of faster than light travel lived 1,000 years ago. The idea of coming this far in less than a century is mind-boggling. Archer says, wait, you guys have had warp capability for over a millennium and you've never come anywhere close to Earth? Drennick says, nah, we don't like traveling long distances. Don't laugh, that's not my joke. That's the actual explanation. Trip seems more impressed with the Vissian warp drive than he did the first time he saw it, and I don't think it's because he sees the benefits of adding positrons, neutrinos, and whatnot. He asked the guy if he and his wife get special quarters for being a couple. The guy falls right into his trap. He says, well, you did promise to try our food. Come by for dinner. Trip is expecting an alien meal, but he gets Wendy's taco salad. Trip says, wait, it's just the three of us? Won't the Cogenitor be joining us? The guy says, oh no, they're like sea monkeys. They can eat, but they can go without food for a week. No problem. Trip says, that's too bad. I at least wanted to say hi. The wife says, well, I just put them down for a nap, but fine. If it'll get you to shut up about it, I'll go get them. Trip goes back to Phlox. The doctor looks over the data and says, what do you know? You were right. The synaptic density of cogenitors is about the same as normal Vissians. Trip asks, meaning? Phlox replies, that all their talk of progenitors being inferior was based entirely on cultural bias. There, I said it. You happy now? Archer and Drennick are flying along. Archer says on road trips, it's traditional for drivers to swap out from time to time, and whoever is at the wheel gets to pick the music. Drennick says, are you sure you can handle it? Our ships use 5 axes, not 4. Archer says, my first shuttle pod was a stick shift. If I can handle that, I can fly anything. Drennick says, okay then, suit yourself. But please, don't play Somewhere in the Night. In the Vissian engine room, Trip and What's-His-Face are trying to figure out how to make their faster warp modifications work on Enterprise. Trip says, it's 6 a.m. Look, I saw Duncan on board. I'm gonna go get myself some coffee and a chocolate fudge glaze. You want anything? The guy says, nah, we tend to only eat 1 meal a day. Which is fine by Trip because he's not really hungry anyway. He goes to the guy's orders and the Cogenitor is the only one there. They say, what do you want? He hands them a kid's learning pad. They say, what use could I have for this? Everyone knows Cogenitors can't read. Trip says, we did the scans? Biologically, there's no reason you can't learn. Your gender is the only reason they don't want you to. Cocky says, I could get in trouble, but not wanting to seem rude, they take the pad. Back on Enterprise, it seems I was wrong about Reed. Touring our armories wasn't a euphemism. They're actually doing it.
Jess, they immediately bang in the Jeffries tubes.
Well, yeah, but how they get there is rather amusing. She says, hey, we seemed to have something yesterday. Why didn't we have? Reed says, on my planet, it's customary for the man to take the woman to dinner first. She says, oh, you do the whole feed 'em, fuck 'em, and forget thing in the wrong order. We Vissians fuck 'em first. That way, what we forget is eating Taco Bell and watching National Treasure 2. Reed says, well, normally the captain doesn't like cultural contamination, but I think I'm going to like this cultural exchange. Coggy and Trip go on reading. In hours, they've graduated from Hop on Pop to Jean Paul Sartre. Trip says, you can study anything you want. Coggy says, why bother? Nobody is going to let me use any of it. Trip says, bullshit. If you can convince CBS executives that you can play a 17-year-old girl over on Joan of Arcadia when you're 28, you can convince people of anything. Cocky says, fine, but if we're doing this, I want a name. I want to be called Trip after you. He says, well, my name is actually Charles. Cocky says, fine, then I'll be Charles. Trip sighs, why didn't I let crewman Jingleheimer Schmidt be your reading teacher? They sneak on board Enterprise. Trip gives Coggy the tour. They start with the transporter. He explains how it works. Coggy wants to try it. Trip says, do you want to end up an invisible ghost? Because that's how you wind up an invisible ghost. So they go to engineering instead. Then he finds out they've never seen a movie before. So they engage in that most long and arduous of tasks, sifting through Netflix to find something to watch. They eventually settle on Day the Earth Stood Still.
Yeah, that one wasn't Keanu's best work.
It's not as good as Guillermo del Toro's version, with Doug Jones as both Klaatu and Court.
What?
I guess that hasn't come out for you guys yet. Oops.
No, look, that sounds totally awesome, but no. They go with the original from 1951. Coggy enjoys the movie, but has a question. Why were the humans so mean to Klaatu? Trip says, yeah, before the Vulcans showed up, humans could be pretty awful to each other, just for being different. Whether it be their race, religion, gender, favorite baseball team, you name it, they fought over it. Trip sneaks Coggy home and then gets caught by T'Pol. She says, "What the hell do you think you were doing?" Trip says, "I taught Coggy to read and showed them a movie." T'Pol says, "Yeah, and by doing so you might have caused a diplomatic incident. All Captain Archer wanted was one good first contact. Didn't I tell you not to fuck this up?" Trip says, "Me? Their whole society is fucked up." Trip goes back to work. A few hours later, Coggy shows up in engineering. They say, "My current family found out about what you did and they are pissed. Can I crash on your sofa for, the rest of my natural life?" Trip is in serious trouble because a few minutes later, Archer calls. He says, "Yo, we're just about wrapping up our trip. We'll be back in a few hours." DePaul says, "You better hurry up because someone got us into some serious shit." Archer orders Trip and DePaul into his quarters. He asks, "Where is the Cogenitor?" Trip says, "In my quarters." They've been there all day binge watching every episode of Sliders. Archer says, "DePaul, go get them. I've got to discipline Trip and somebody has to make sure Coggy doesn't get to that season with the Cro-Mags. As for you, Charles Christopher Tucker III, I expect a shit like this from Travis and Hoshi, but..." Trip interrupts him. "I was only doing what you would have done. I didn't think teaching them to read would be a problem." Archer says, "Probably because, as a mere commander, Starfleet has not authorized you to think." Trip says, "But you gave them books and movies." Archer says, "That they asked for." Coggy didn't ask you to teach them to read. You came to that decision on your own, then imposed it on them. Not cool, dude. Not cool. They get Coggy. Archer says, "Look, you gotta go." Coggy says, "But I could get in real trouble." Archer says, "My crew, and maybe my entire civilization, could be in real trouble if you don't." Coggy says, "But what about what Trip said about freedom and stuff?" Archer says, "All of that should be true, but it's not. Sorry." Coggy says, "Well, you'll have to get out your phase pistols because I'm not going willingly." So they go to the conference room. Drennick, What's-His-Face, and Karen are there. Drennick asks, "So, have you decided to return them yet?" Archer says, "No. My world takes asylum claims very seriously, so we have a lot to discuss." Drennick says, "This isn't your world." Archer says, "Well, it's my ship, registered to my planet, so under interstellar law..." Drennick interrupts. "No, that would only apply if our two worlds had a treaty, which they don't. Our world doesn't recognize any claim of asylum, nor do we recognize that a cogenitor even has the right to make such a claim." Archer explains what Phlox found in the brain scan. The Stepford wife says, but that means it could take years before we're given another cogenitor to have a kid. I'm not getting any younger. Archer says, given? Do you hear how that sounds? What's his face says, what if one of those stewards who is forced to make food for you asked for asylum on our ship? Archer says, well, if he thought he could get more than minimum wage plus time and a half and health benefits, more power to him. What's his face says, I see. I totally misread your culture. I rest my case. A little while later, Archer is frowning. DePaul assures him he's made the right decision. He begrudgingly gives Coggy back over to the Visians. Trennick says, look, I can see that today was a little rocky. We recognize that Commander Tucker acted only with the best of intentions, but he was wrong. So, relations between our planets is still A-OK. A few hours later, Archer's in his quarters just chilling with Porthos. Drennick calls. Archer sighs. Then we cut to him talking to Trip. He says, you should probably hear this from me. Your friend, Coggy, they're dead now. They made the, YouTube unfriendly life decision. You know what I mean? Trip says, this is all my fault. Archer says, yup. We always knew your impulsiveness was eventually going to get you into trouble. Now, not only is one person no longer alive, but another might never be born. I bet Starfleet can't wait to give you your diplomacy merit badge. Then he rants and raves about how his proposed General Order 1 could have prevented all of this and how he should have been there to make sure the protocol was implemented correctly. Trip says, this is in no way your fault. And that's it. That's the episode. Okay, this episode is most fans and the entire cast and crew's favorite episode of Star Trek Enterprise. It is also the definitive pick for best episode of season 2. The former is an opinion I do not agree with. There are plenty of episodes, most of them from seasons 3 and 4, that I find much more entertaining than Cogenitor. The latter is absolutely true, and that's a huge problem. The reason for that, which I'm pretty sure I'm going to go in more in depth on when I do the whole season rant wrap in part 4, is that much like Vanishing Point, this episode is a remake. This time a redo of Star Trek The Next Generation Season 5's The Outcast. In that episode, Riker falls for an androgynous alien who, admit to him, against the taboos of her society, she identifies as female. Only she gets caught and arrested. She's forced into psychoactive treatments against her will. Riker thinks this is barbaric. Picard tells him, Prime Directive, what are you gonna do? Worf says, no, Commander Riker is right. We'll go down there and kick some ass. So they try to rescue her, but she's already brainwashed. We, the audience, and Riker are heartbroken. But Picard tells us that they were wrong to try and they should just be okay with it. But Jess, I hear you say, I see how these two stories are similar. But Trip and Coggy didn't have a romantic relationship, and Soren from The Outcast didn't do that thing that YouTube will come down on me hard for even mentioning. How are these the same story? Well, I'll tell you. The Outcast's credited writer, Jerry Taylor, said she was happy with the overall quality of the episode. Many of her co-workers were not. And I'm not just talking about Jonathan Frakes. In the Star Trek Deep Space Nine documentary, What We Left Behind, Ira Steven Behr said that Star Trek, at least when he was writing it, didn't go far enough with LGBTQ issues. There are old fanzines where people connected with the show said that they wished the Outcast had taken a much darker turn and told Rick Berman as much at the time. Seeing their ending slapped on to Cogenitor and Rick Berman getting praised as a genius for writing it must have felt like a kick to the junk. I guess what I'm trying to say is The Outcast seemed like a fairly progressive episode in 1992, though some of its messaging was a better fit for 1982. 5 years later, when Ellen did their famous Puppies episode, things like The Outcast became incredibly dated. Cogenitor is slightly better than The Outcast, but it came out in 2003. It feels like the episode Star Trek should have made in 1992. But look on the bright side. After this, it's not like Star Trek ever did anything that could be construed as homophobic ever again. Scratch that. Cogenitor would deserve criticism even if that were its only problem. It's the writers trying to pin the blame on what Coggy did in the end on Trip that really gets me. You can't do that. Coggy, and by extension all Cogenitors, were being treated unjustly whether they knew it or not. All Trip did was help Coggy understand that their surrogate family, and by extension their whole society, could not exist without exploiting the Cogenitors and denying them personhood. That's the truth. I know that voting a smarter person is the lazy man's way of appearing smart, but I think it was either physicist Carl Sagan or fantasy author P.C. Hodgel who said that which can be destroyed by the truth deserves to be destroyed by the truth. Trip did not teach Coggy about the non-living option or condone it. But through his choice of movies, he did teach them about freedom and liberty and the unfortunate fact that it sometimes requires a sacrifice. I have to admit that was a nice touch. But when you get right down to it, Trip was not allowed to attend the meeting. Archer did not consult with him at all before making his decision. So no, Coggy didn't do what they did because a series of good decisions Trip made, but one horrible one made by Archer. That's where I feel the blame should lie.
And if you disagree, leave a comment.
Wait, that was the pick for a good episode?
I'm afraid so. But we're gonna do The Expanse just to be on the safe side.
Yeah, I like that show. I mean, the clips I've seen. I've never actually watched a full episode. I don't have that kind of attention span.
No, not the show. The Enterprise episode, The Expanse. Totally different.
You're no fun.
You have failed me for the last time.
Look, I've had it. It's always me, Mauro Valent, Twitter review Q. Shmee Mauro Valent, blow up their house with a cell ship. When are you gonna get off your sass and do something?
I, um,
That's what I thought.
Hey, Nick. Now that Jess has gone to take Gizmo for a walk, do you want to watch some Bob's Burgers?
Yeah, a good show for once. That's nice.
Who the hell are you?
Uh-oh. This could be very bad.
I wonder what Gizmo is dreaming about.
Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe.
And remember, to really help this channel grow, visit patreon.com/parodyerrorfilms and become a patron today.